Louder? Okay. I will try to do my best, or maybe I can hold this closer. Yeah? Okay. Sorry. So today I will be talking about bonsai styling, your own unique approach and preferences, how time, countries, schools influence bonsai around the world. Because in my opinion, Japanese bonsai are guidelines, and we can break these guidelines if we know the technique properly, and we can care about these bonsai. And we need to tell our own story, or our tree can tell our own story about how it wants to look and what story we want to tell, or which story the tree wants to tell, okay? So I'm going to tell a little bit about the history of bonsai. So bonsai actually started in China. And while the word bonsai is of Japanese origin, the concept of this art form actually took root in China. Since the Yin and Zhou dynasties nearly 3,000 years ago, people in China have cultivated ornamental plants to imitate natural scenery within gardens, a craft known as panjing. So they made more or less mostly landscapes with smaller trees, and bonsai started with this. Then it is believed that the first stray landscapes were bought from China to Japan at least 1,200 years ago as religious souvenirs. 1,000 years ago, the first lengthy work of fiction in Japanese, including this passage, a tree that is left growing in its natural state is a crude thing. It is only when it's kept close to human beings who fashion it with love and care that its shape and style acquired to the ability to move on, to move on. It's the first time I'm doing this in English, so I need to peek a little bit. Sorry for that. So in Japan, they lived in a bubble time, and they had a lot of time to do philosophy, and how they found the rock in nature is also how they took that rock from nature and put it in their garden, because they were into Zen and stuff like that. And because they were in a bubble time, they had a lot of money, a lot of time. Also, I don't know if you all seen these lovely bunjin trees on scrolls and stuff like that. So bonsai started with that a little bit. So as they found these trees in nature, they took them from nature, put it in a pot, and presented them in their garden like that, okay? So bonsai didn't really had rules back then, but it was since the war that American people during the war came to Japan that they started with rules. Because bonsai during the World War, while bonsai and import already started to thrive before the war, in 1941, the Asia-Pacific War started and many trees were destroyed. During Allied occupation of Japan, which continued through 1952, many US officers were stationed in Japan together with their families. To spend their time, it was common among military wives to take courses in traditional arts and crafts, like ikebana, and including bonsai and bonkei. Bonkei is more or less working with trees as well. These courses, which were arranged by the US military, helped spread the knowledge of bonsai also to North America. Okay? So then they started to apply rules or guidelines how to create a bonsai tree. In 1952, Yuji Yoshimura, the son of the Japanese bonsai master, collaborated with the German diplomat, author, and bonsai aficionado Alfred Kuhn to arrange bonsai demonstrations and would be open to the public and accessible even for foreigners. And then they started with several schools, and in Japan there are several schools, but even there are a lot of garden nurseries. Every bonsai master has his own style and his own story to tell about how he will shape trees and stuff like that. But in Japan it started with the linear classical school, and these were these very tender trees with not too much branches, with very defined foliar pads, foliar clouds, okay? And it emphasizes the line. So this tree had a very tender trunk with a lot of open spaces, okay? The branches were low in volume and perfectly defined profiles. And the dominant line of this tree was mostly the height. So it was a very tender trunk and a very high tree. The first branch was not very low, but quite high. And they were externally light and graceful, okay? If anyone has questions about this, just ask me. If you had a blackboard, I could more or less draw how these trees would look actually. It would be, but if you can see in the back, it would be more like the bunjing or the literati style tree over there, okay? Then after that, they started to do some philosophy again, and they had the volume classical school. And does anyone know Mauro Stamberger from Italy? Yeah? Mauro Stamberger uses this style quite a lot because he has massive big trees. And with some big trees in Japan, they still use this style as well. And if you can see the black pine on the screen, this is a tree that resembles this volume classic school. And this emphasizes the volume of the tree, so mostly the foliage. You had a very big trunk, very like a fat trunk, you know, fat trunk, not too high. And the foliage covered most of the trunk almost. The branches were high in volume and covers almost the entire trunk. And the dominant line of this tree was mostly the width, okay? The first branch was always quite very low, and their appearance was heavy and sturdy. So what you can see in this tree as well is that it has back branches to create depth, but you don't see any open spaces, okay? So this was that kind of style. And then they started to do philosophy again, and then they mixed these two stylings together. And that made the neoclassic school, and that was a mix of both. Does anybody know what Tashigari means? And in the workshops, these couple of days, I already talked about it. Does anybody know what Tashigari means? You can say.
I say now we do.
But you can tell. I want this to be very interactive, and the more you ask and the more you say, it will be better, okay? So the Tashigari means is the lowest part of the trunk. So that means from your root spread, if you can see over there, to your first branch. And this part always needs to be visible. So that part will always be visible, and it also gives the flow of your tree. So that means when your trunk is going to that way, and you see the first branch, that part needs to be visible, okay? And they always would make trees out of 3/3. So that means the first part is visible, then 2/3 would be parts of the trunk would be hidden, but not all, because if you have a very interesting movement, then you would make a picture frame around this movement, and that would stand this movement out, or how do you would emphasize this movement actually. And then you would have like 3/3, and that would be the apex, and that's completely covered, or almost completely covered, except if you have a literati or a bunjing style, okay? Also, what they started to do is make more triangular volumes, and the volume school and the linear school was mixed together in these, okay? Okay. Any questions about that?
So just in general, the time scale of these different philosophies, like when was, say, like the first one, when did that come about?
The first one was around the World War, more or less.
So sort of post-war.
Yeah.
What
Yeah.
were the most common shapes and styles, I guess, prior to that?
The first one was more like the bunjing literati style, so the trees that they found in nature like that. And then they started to grow bonsai themselves as well, and then they started to see different styles, okay? And then there was a guy who started the contemporary bonsai school in Japan. And who's that? Who? Kimura, yeah, Masahiko Kimura. So Masahiko Kimura was a guy, his father died when he was age 5 or something, okay? So they were very poor, and he had to work at the age of 14 or 15 at a bonsai professional in Japan to, how do I say it? To care for his mother and his sisters and stuff like that. And he started, because they didn't have a lot of money, he started to create very beautiful bonsai out of very cheap material to make them better. And first, the Japanese bonsai societies were not very fond of him, but then after a while, when they saw that he did great things and he has, how do I have to say it? He has found some new techniques and developed new techniques, and then they started to have a big appreciation for him, and now he's like the best of Japan. Okay, so he founded the contemporary bonsai school. And like that's Masahiko Kimura. And here you see that are just produced cheap material, and he made a very nice rock planting. But even the rock he made himself, okay? But not only that, he made out of not so easy material, very incredible bonsai by crafting on it, by air layering big, awesome junipers and stuff like that. But also he would be one like, so bonsai, if you follow the rules, okay, you would have a corner. And in this corner you have a, what do you have in your corners? If you have like informal upright tree, in every corner you should have a branch, more or less, okay? But there are also a lot of Yamadori trees or trees that you can find in the wild with a lot of movement. But in a curve, you have a branch with a lot of movement. Would you cut it?
No.
Why not?
Because it's hard to grow something with that kind of movement.
Yes, it gives the tree more character. So if you would cut it, the tree loses its character and you have a 12 in a dozen tree, okay? So sometimes it makes a tree more special, and sometimes you have to break the rules. So Masahiko Kimura was very innovative, and it was the origin of the classic school. So these rules are actually guidelines. But if I can say a bad word, he would say, fuck the rules and we can break them, okay? So it was not that strict, and the founder is Masahiko Kimura, okay? Who is Masahiko Kimura? So I already told a little bit about him. He became an apprentice at the age of 14, 15 years old at Tojuan under Motosuke Hamano for 11 years. That's quite long because normally the time to do an apprenticeship is around 5 to 7 years, okay? Afterwards, you still stay an apprentice, and when it are busy times, like for Kokufu and for Sakufu, then you need to come back to your master for a couple of weeks to help him out and to help everyone, okay? After his masterpieces were seen as controversial and different from traditional work in his first years, and afterwards he became very popular for excellent starkness and uniqueness. Here you can see one of his Yamadori junipers that he put on a rock, and this was actually a very tall tree which he air layered or maybe grafted roots on to make the tree more compact. And it started to become a very famous tree in Japan as well. Here are two other trees of him. So the first one is a juniper that's called the Blue Dragon. And in Japan, with junipers, the more the life vein goes around its deadwood, the more valuable the tree is. And this one goes around 7 or 9 times. I have to lie about it, sorry. But this tree was a lot bigger as well. And what he has done is he cut a big piece of deadwood out of it because it was quite long. And what he's done is, where the roots and the life vein were, he put raffia around it and curled it up and put it in a pot. This tree hasn't been repotted for maybe 15 years or something, okay? And it's now one of the most famous trees in Japan, okay? Then the other one is a Hinoki forest he created, also from not very expensive material, but he made a unique art piece out of it. So he was known to do special things, okay? Anyone questions? Yeah.
So was his people's appreciation of him and fame similar in Japan and internationally? Did internationally come first, or Japan come first in terms of his stature and bonsai?
I think first in Japan it came and then internationally. I think because of internet, a lot of things happened worldwide, but before it was a little bit different. So I think.
In timing-wise, when did sort of he emerge as master in like 2000 around there? Or when
I have no idea. I think much earlier. I think around years 80 or something, maybe something like that. I guess. So he's now around this end 80s, if I'm correct. So yeah, and he still is doing great work. The thing is, he thinks that much about bonsai that he's always continuing and improving and doing new things and new techniques and stuff like that. That at his age is still only thinking in his mind about bonsai. He's that obsessed about it. We all should be. So now I'm going to tell something different, and that was the start of contemporary bonsai art. And there are like Masaki Kimura had a lot of Japanese apprentices. And like Marco Invernizzi was the first European apprentices. And then you had Ryan Neal, who was the first American apprentice that I'm aware of, okay? And I want to show you that even when you learn techniques from your master, at first when you learn there, you need to follow his rules and his guidance. And then when you finish it, you can do your own thing. And I'm going to show this because Ryan Neal had a senpai, and that's Taiga Urishibata. His father already had a bonsai nursery called Taishuan, and his father was Nobushi Urishibata. So he got influenced by his father and by Kimura, okay? And this is Taiga, okay? So he was influenced by his father, Nobushi Urishibata, who owned Taishuan, and Masaki Kimura, where he was an apprentice. And Masaki Kimura loves to make bonsai in a different way. So my master was Kunio Kobayashi, and Kunio Kobayashi loved to make natural bonsai, but when a trunk would go to that way, the first branch had to go to that way and the apex as well. And that makes an imbalanced tree, but he would make balance in, how do I say it? Balance in composition by using a bigger pot so that this tree looks balanced. What Kimura would do if a trunk would go that way, he would make his first branch go to that way to create balance into the tree. And that's a all different thinking. What Taiga does is he does the same. So you can see that it follows the rules of the old school bonsai. So you have 1/3, 2/3, and 3/3 of your trunk. So you have the Tashigari with your first branch. And in that first branch, there are 3 foliage clouds, if you can see in the back, okay? And they're alternating. And very important is that you have open space from your first branch. And then when you have your counterbalance branch, you have 2 foliage clouds, and your foliage clouds become smaller, the open spaces become smaller, and the foliage clouds become more defined. Then you can see that parts of the trunk get hidden, where it's like 2/3, and where it's 3/3, most of the apex is completely hidden, or the trunk is completely hidden, okay? So what Taiga does is he keeps following the guidelines that Masaki Kimura teach them, okay? And here are some other trees of him, which he did. He still tries to do some new things. So he's trying to develop his skills and do special things like this juniper to put it in a, like, this is kind of a Miyogi, Sabamiki style, but also like a cascading style. But normally it would be in a cascading pot, and this one isn't. This one is in a moon shell, and the branches are hanging down like it's on a cliff, and the branches are dropping. So he tries to do something else, but still it's in these guidelines that Kimura teach them. Then the other one is a demonstration at the trophy in Belgium, where the trunk goes to that way and he creates balance into the tree with bringing the first branch to that side as well. Okay? Any questions about that?
that a European pine?
That's a Mughal pine collected by Mauro Stamberger, I think. And that was, I think, already 10 years ago, I think. So yeah. But he made a great demonstration into that. And then we have one of most famous American people coming now, and that's Ryan Neal. And he was influenced by Harold Sasaki, and I think that most of you people know him around here because he's from Denver, more or less, yeah. And he was the teacher of Ryan Neal, and he influenced Ryan Neal a lot, and then afterwards Masahiko Kimura, Ryan apprenticed for Masahiko Kimura, and Masahiko Kimura influenced him and helped him with his career in America. So he was there for, I think, 6 or 7 years. And what Ryan Neal does is, first he had to follow the guidelines of his master, but then he started to do something different, and he started to play with dynamic and with creating drama in a tree. So that means, or I can show you, this juniper is one of his most famous trees, I guess. What he does is he makes a diagonal line between life and death, and he creates balance into the composition. If you put a diagonal line, you see the green of the foliage, and you see the heavy part of the deadwood. And that creates a lot of balance because it's half and half, but also because he has a bigger pot, he creates balance into this composition, because if it would be in a smaller pot, this tree would tilt into, or would drop, okay? With this pine, he does the same. He creates a diagonal line with the trunk and the foliage, and it's cascading to there. By using a bigger pot, he creates balance into the composition as well. So he tries to play with drama a lot. And I want to explain by this, like, you can follow the guidelines, but you need to tell your own story with the tree, and you need to find the most interesting parts in the trunk, or the tree will tell you the most interesting parts of the trunk, and you need to tell your story about how you want the tree to grow, or the tree will tell you, okay? With this one as well, you can put a diagonal line between life and death, and it creates a very beautiful, dramatic growing of the tree, okay? Then you have my master, Kunio Kobayashi. While his parents had a flower nursery, Kobayashi started doing bonsai in his late 20s and was self-taught. He told me once a story that first he was like a professional gymnast. So he did the things with the ropes and the rounds. I don't know what it's called in English, but... And he was quite professional in that, and then he started to do bonsai because it was more profitable. Sorry for... so he started, because Satsuki bonsai was starting to become very famous in Japan, and he saw business in that. So he started with Satsuki bonsai, that is a Satsuki. And then he started to develop or to work with different kinds of trees like black pines and junipers and stuff like that. So after 40 years of doing bonsai art, he changed his style from creating beautiful, clean trees to what he calls Aji no Aho bonsai. And he wants to mimic this in the harshness of nature. So while I was there, it was also a time when he had a lot of Chinese customers, and he still has. He tries to do a mix of Japanese bonsai with Chinese bonsai, and to create a more natural tree. What we had to do when we worked there, we would go for a tree with a branch to there, but we had to keep the branch longer. And that was for a commercial aspect, because Japanese people would say, when we cut this tree, when we cut this branch, we create a Japanese bonsai, and then they would say, we changed the tree of Kunio Kobayashi. So for a commercial aspect, that was quite interesting and maybe good. And because he had a lot of Chinese customers, it was also very good because they liked his style a lot. And then he started to create more natural trees. So while Kimura would shape these very clean trees, and while Taiga Urishibata shapes these very clean trees, Urishibata tries to make them more natural with more hanging branches, with even branches that grow with foliage, not very, like when I work on a tree, I clean everything that grows down so you can see the branch structure. But he would keep it and have it a little bit messy. It's a style, and you have to like it or not, but he wants to tell his story about it. And he's also one of the last ones who know about Keido, the real art of displaying. And he really wants to show people how real natural trees look. Okay? Then one of his apprentices is my senpai, Minoru Akiyama. And he was influenced by his father, and he is a second generation bonsai pro of Yamanashi Prefecture. And he was also influenced by Kunio Kobayashi because he apprenticed there for 6 years. And he's very known for several techniques because his father already worked. His father was a Yamadori collector. So his father collected a lot of very good junipers that are not able to be collected anymore. So he has a lot of very good junipers. But they also had a growing field with beech trees and other kinds of species. So he has a lot of knowledge about many species. And he's also known to be a very good grafter. And if you can graft very well in Japan, they pay you even more to do this work. So he has a lot of work with doing this. And he's also quite known for his very refined work. Here are a few junipers of his collection, Yamadori trees that are very refined and very beautiful, okay? And then you have, does anybody know Peter Warren? Yeah, Peter Warren is the English guy up top there. He went to Japan because of soccer. He liked soccer a lot. And then he started to teach English and literature to Japanese people there. And then he had a visit to Shunkan of Kunio Kobayashi, and then he started his apprenticeship. So while soccer brought him to Japan, he finished after a 6-year apprenticeship at Kunio Kobayashi. He's very inspired by nature and likes to mix contemporary art with his bonsai. If you ever see this guy or want to follow him on YouTube, he has a lot of knowledge. He can explain it very well. He's a very good guy. And he tries to make trees more natural as well. So he kept the teachings of his master and developed his style a little bit as well by looking at trees in European forests and European nature. And here are a few trees that he styled. So this is a lavender, rosemary, a spruce from Europe, and a sylvestris pine from the UK. If you can see also that it's not a very clean structure, but that's because he likes this natural styling, what is very interesting as well. Also, his maintenance, what he does, is very interesting. You want to say something?
Didn't he join the family?
Sorry?
Didn't he join Kobayashi's family?
In what way?
I think he married him.
I know Akiyama's son is married with his daughter. I don't think Peter Warren is together with his daughter. But Kobayashi sees him as a son. And he's into the family in a kind of way, but not married into the family. Okay? Then we have Kiichi Fujikawa. And this is the master of Bjorn Bjorholm. And I think everybody knows Bjorn Bjorholm as well. So Mr. Fujikawa is the second generation owner of Fujikawa Kaukan Nursery and is one of the most respected bonsai nurserymen in the Kansai area of Japan. He spent several years as an apprentice under Saburo Kato from Manseian. in Omiya and has since devoted himself to the progression and development of the bonsai art, both within Japan and abroad. So he travels also around the world to teach bonsai. I think now it's a little bit less, but before he traveled quite some time in Europe. I don't know, the US as well, maybe? Does someone know? No? Okay. And these are a few trees of his collection. And he has a very good technique, but he has a different approach on styling. And Bjorn had to follow this kind of styling. So this is Bjorn. Everybody knows Bjorn, I guess. As you can see, that these trees are very clean, but very clean. Very properly styled, and the foliage clouds are very straight as well and very triangular. But the technique that is done is very proper, very nice, and the trees are all very healthy. So when Bjorn finished his apprenticeship, he changed his styling into creating more drama in trees as well, and he created foliage clouds that are more have this shape. Okay. This is Naoki Maeoki. He was an apprentice at Fujikawa as well, and he studied art and graphic design. And his styling is still the same styling as Fujikawa, so very straight and very static styling. You can see it with these trees. So these are trees that are very dramatic, but it makes it almost look like plastic. It looks very static, so it's not a wrong way to do bonsai. So I don't say that it's bad or not good. It's his story he wants to tell about nature or what he thinks that bonsai is for him. So I mean, there's not a good way or not a bad way if you do bonsai, okay? Then you have Bjorn Bjorholm, and he was influenced by several American bonsai masters and apprenticed under Fujikawa. And as you can see, this is in Japan. He had a very clean structure. And then on the left, a juniper that he styled also under Fujikawa, also still very static, very clean. And then afterwards, he changed his styling a little bit in the US. And you can see that it's still very clean, but it's more dynamic. The foliage clouds are more dynamically shaped, which features better with the movement and the drama of the tree, okay? Then the story of perception in a view. Also what I think it's important to tell about is how you see the tree and from what distance that you can see the tree. So if I would be on a mountain and I see the tree from down there somewhere, or if I would be very close to the tree and I would see the branch structure more. So that's also a story. So this tree, you don't see the branch structure a lot, so you only see the foliage. So you could see that tree maybe from up top if you stand on a mountain or something. While on this tree, you see the branch structure a lot. So it maybe means that you're closer to the tree and you look at the tree from frog perspective, and that one from bird's eye view. So that's also important to keep in mind. What story do you want to tell? So you need to check how you want to create these foliage clouds as well, okay? Then bonsai in Europe and how these people changed their styling as well. Does anybody know Mario Komsta? Mario Komsta is quite a famous bonsai artist in Europe, and he studied under Nobushi Urashibata. He had an apprenticeship there, and here he is. He's from Poland, but he lives in Spain. He's very good with European Yamadori, create a very clean, natural style, very beautiful. He completed a 5-year apprenticeship in Taishuan Nursery, Japan, under Nobushi Urashibata, and received a certificate of skill in bonsai. He's a recognized professional by Nippon Bonsai Association and All Japan Shoen Bonsai Association. This is a tree, a Yamadori tree that was collected by a professional I worked for, Jopo Polmans. And this tree had long branches. So he bent these branches and made this beautiful bonsai in a few years' time. So he did a great job. And he also started to make, he used to make bonsai in a very Japanese way. And now, since a few years, he started to read a lot of books and he wants to change bonsai a bit. So he wants to make trees more special. And here you have a few examples of a few trees that he did. So that's is more like a bunjing style, and it's the first styling. But he looked a lot more to these Japanese scrolls where you see these bunjing trees with these cascading branches. And he changed his style into more or less that. Here you see the same, very clean bunjing style. And here a very natural bunjing style. And that's quite complicated to make this into a convincing bonsai, but he's done a very good job with that one. And here's a juniper that he did, but not, how do I have to explain it? If it would be in a Japanese style, it would be more balanced. Well, you see that it goes a lot to that way, but it goes very far to that way, okay? Any questions? Yes.
So, how much of this change in styles with some of these people, like this guy, has to do with availability and working on Yamadori versus in Japan? My understanding is at least the pines and some of those species, they're all nursery or field grown. Is that true?
In Japan, they still have a lot of Yamadori as well, but these trees are already maintained from family to family to family. And these trees are already in a lot of refined stages. So what they had to do is they had to refine it, and that was it. And they had to follow what their master told them to do. Because their master wanted this story, and they have a vision that they created over the years. And then when they came back, they could do their own thing. So, and as you can look at it, or if you see a tree, you have to tell your story with it. So you had a master as well, and maybe at a certain point you would say, maybe I would do this different or something. But I also think that if you look at the character of a tree, the tree will tell you what needs to be done. Something like that.
So, but I guess what I'm asking is if you apprentice in Japan, then come here, and you're working on Yamadori,
Influence you? I think it does. I think it does. Because there are certain branches from Yamadori that you have to keep and you cannot cut because it would make the tree less beautiful. So yeah. So that would be a shame. But I also think that it's good to learn from several kinds of people and pick the most interesting things or things that you think are interesting and develop your own style with it. I think this is very important in doing bonsai as well. Instead of following everybody's. What I mainly think is like, and I tell this to people, like, I can decide for you what to do, but you have to look at your tree every day. So it's making a compromise with your tree, with yourself, and with the people or the person who teaches you at that moment. While some other professionals want to push their opinion a little bit too much. More or less like that. Here we have a famous guy from Belgium, Danny Hughes. I don't know if you know this guy. He is one of the founders, not really founders, but he is more of the founders from Belgium Bonsai, together with Mark Newlanders. And he had a very famous exposition called the Ginkgo Award. He has a very famous nursery in Belgium called also Ginkgo Bonsai. And he already started at the age of 17. So his parents had a tree nursery. And at the age of 17, Danny started his bonsai nursery. I think Danny now is 65 or 67. 67, I think. And he traveled a lot to Japan as buying trips. And bonsai in Europe started to boom with great thanks to Danny who made the ginkgo award happen. So a lot of people in Europe traveled to Danny to make this bonsai exhibition happen and to have the best bonsai from Europe at his place for an exhibition. And while he first followed the Japanese rules more, he now dislikes the Japanese style. He's a little bit fed up with it. Not in a bad way because he likes bonsai, but he wants to grow trees in pots more, like natural trees. And this is a maple of him. It's a one with the small green leaves. Sorry? No, not a trident. I cannot think about it now, but maybe it will come up later. So, yeah, I cannot find it now. So, but he made a very convincing natural style out of that one, and it's a very slow-growing maple. This one. Here are a few others of his trees. Well, first he was more into Japanese trees, into this Japanese white pine, which he made into a cascading one. Here he started with a juniper that was first more clean, and now he started to appreciate more natural style with more branches that are loose and flowing. Here as well, here's also, I think, a Dashoyo maple, which he made into a very natural styling. So he changed his beliefs in doing bonsai and wanting to create more a natural style of bonsai, okay? Here's a juniper that he created from raw stock. He has grown this from cutting and created a very beautiful juniper as well, but also not really into Japanese styling, but more perspective of what he thinks is natural. So then we have Walter Paul, also one who influenced bonsai in Europe and also in America a lot, I guess. Everybody knows him here, or most people, okay. So he took up bonsai as a hobby in the 1980s, and in 1990 he left his job to become a part-time bonsai professional. Walter Paul is particularly known for his workshops and lectures, which he gives at conventions around the world. As most people here already know, that Walter has his own natural styling, and he explains bonsai very well. So he's very good with explaining and how do you have to say it? He gives a show away when he's talking about bonsai. And he's very famous about his hedge cutting method with, how do I have to say, for some, there are people who like it and people who dislike it. So there's always some conflict around it. But what I want to tell us is that I appreciate what he's done for the bonsai world, and also his technique, what he's done with the hedge cutting. It happens in Japan as well. You have a garden in Japan where they have a few deciduous trees, and there's now an English guy that finished his studying there, Seth Nelson. Does anybody know him? Seth Nelson? No, it's an American guy, sorry.
Is he the guy that slashes versus pruning branches?
He prunes them like a hedge cutting technique, so like this more or less. So, but there's a gardener in Japan who does the same technique, and they create a lot of very fine ramification by using this hedge cutting technique. So that's very interesting. Here are a few of his trees that he made into very natural bonsai, like a spruce, I think a Carpinus orientalis, and again a spruce. So he's very into not using too much wire and creating very natural trees. Then bonsai in America, and who influenced bonsai in America. And I already talked about two, so we're going now to talk about one very famous guy in America who influenced bonsai a lot in America. Has a book as well, John Naka. John Yoshio Naka is the most influential bonsai masters in the American bonsai industry, especially from the 1950s to the 1960s. He was one of the first bonsai masters to teach bonsai in a non-Japanese language, making learning the art form of bonsai easier and more convenient for non-Japanese aspiring artists. Here's John Naka with one of his most famous forests. And he has a book about where he explains his stylings, and you can see drawings of him. So this is John Naka as well. Then I want to explain about bonsai in China. So this is mainly Panjing and more Chinese style. So if you can see it, it's a lot different from the Japanese balanced trees. So what they would do in China is they add figurines. Trees are bigger because like Shoen bonsai is from 5 to 21 centimeters in Japan. In China, they put a display with Shoen that are much bigger. The trees are also much bigger. In Japan, bonsai trees are up to 1.20 meters. In China, they just don't care. And I've was for demonstrations in China, and they took a forklift, and they had a very big table that was not very clean as well. Even for an exhibition, they don't clean the table and stuff like that. But they put a tree with a forklift on a big table and put it on an exposition like that. As you can see, they create longer branches, and it's just a different technique and a different styling, but very interesting as well. Any questions? Nothing? Bonsai in Taiwan. So here you can see like this is more or less a Premna and very beautiful trunk. And what they do in Taiwan is they create very good deciduous bonsai by clip and grow and not wiring too much. So this is, for me, a very beautiful technique that they use. And also the junipers that they make are very incredible. Most of these trees are also field grown, and they make interesting trees out of it. So also very different from Japanese bonsai. Then we have a guy called Laurent Darieux. He's a French guy. And he studied in bonsai in Taiwan. And he created the Tim Burton style or cosmic bonsai style. And I think everybody knows him as well, no? It's a little bit, how do I say it in English? Provocative. So he's founder of this cosmic bonsai style, and he was influenced by Japanese bonsai from the start. Then in Taiwan, he went to Taiwan and lived there for a while and studied bonsai there. And then he made his own perception and art by letting the tree grow, using scarification on trees as well, like some people do as tattoos, and not cutting the tips until the tree had his shape. So for me, this is quite interesting. If you can make a tree like that one that he has, then you must understand trees very well. And then your technique is very well done as well. So it's a very special style, and I would love to have like 1 tree or 2 trees in my collection like that as well, because he does something different. And he first let the tree grow without cutting, creating insane movement in this tree, and then also add deadwood. So every time he would add a piece of deadwood on the same part, and then the cambium grows, and then he add deadwood again to create more movement and interesting parts from this tree. So it's very interesting as well. Okay? Any questions about this? Okay. So this was more or less it about what I wanted to tell about how bonsai can influence everybody's styling, more or less. If anybody has questions about several things, I'm still open to say a few words about it. Okay? Anyone?
When you were looking for a friend to ship,
Mm-hmm.
how did you go about deciding who you wanted to study with?
For me, it was difficult to decide because I liked a few gardens. But when I was 16 years old, I gave a demonstration in the UK, and there I met Peter Warren, who apprenticed under Kunio Kobayashi. So that was for me the most easy part in being there. Also, there were 2 Japanese apprentices at that time, and they didn't have a lot of experience with bonsai. So Kunio Kobayashi needed someone who already could wire and stuff like that. So that's why it was easier for me to already go there. Normally, you first would have to try a couple of weeks, or you had to pay for to study there for 1 month or 2 months. I already could start from the beginning and got paid from the start, so that was quite nice. Okay. Anything else? Yes.
How do you describe your style and how you change from where you learned?
In my part, it changed a lot because I first studied with Jean-Paul Polmans, and back in that time, there was a lot of Yamadori material available, but with branches that were quite far. And like in Italy, they had this style called what we call spaghetti bonsai. And what happened was a lot of professionals in Europe would take these incredible Yamadori material pines and would bend these branches into all different kinds of shapes, and also the long leggy branches. So that means that you create a foliage cloud, but all these branches would be wrapped up in each other. And sometimes if this was your foliage cloud and it wouldn't be a wire, they would drop, and you could just actually, you could do like, you know, it was like a spring. So that was the first approach of styling, what they teach me. So I had to change my style like different times actually, and unteach me and teach my styling, or teach a different styling again. So that was the first start. Then afterwards I went to Kunio Kobayashi. Well, actually no. Then I started to take workshops with Hotsumi Terakawa, who is a Japanese/Dutch guy who is very talented, and he changed my way of view. Then I started to take workshops with Mario Komsta. He changed my view again. Then I started to do the apprenticeship with Kunio Kobayashi. He was more into the Chinese style, and he had a very natural style. And this, from my part, I wanted to learn at first. And I changed my styling in that again. And then when I came back from Japan, I had a school with Manuel Gramade, and he studied under Taiga Urishibata, who made very clean bonsai. And I started to work on a more future rail bonsai that makes you progress even faster. So it's more or less like the styling of Kimura, but it's with alternating branches. And also, even in your, how do I have to say? Even in your primary branch, then your branch splits in 2, and these branches split into 2 again. And that's to make your work in future more easy, because if it keeps on splitting in 2s, and a tree needs to grow. So that means my foliage cloud will get longer, 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 but your tree needs to be in proportion. So at one point I should cut it back, okay? So that means if I cut it back and if my branches were alternating, then I can cut it back, and with one wire I could wire 2 branches and I create the foliage cloud that I made 2-3 years ago again. So it makes my work more easy because I work in a more future way. Something like that, okay? So that changed. Also, I try to, how do I have to say it? I also try different things and different things on trees. So I try to look at the tree and what the tree tells me. So sometimes when I have a tree that has a branch with a lot of character, but this branch is quite long, I will leave it like that instead of making a more triangular bonsai shape and go for maybe a more Chinese style or more bunjing kind of styling. Depends on what the tree tells me. So I try to do several things. And I think sometimes it's interesting to copy something that fits with a tree. Okay. Someone else? Yes?
You did a great job with the workshops. I just want to say that. Maybe you want to speak about your soil mix, also the story of the
Yeah, sure. Okay, I will. So, why do we use substrates for bonsai? Why do we use granular mixes? Does anybody know that?
Air.
Sorry?
Air. The roots.
Not really air, but what do roots need? 3 things.
Water, oxygen, and nutrients.
Yes, water, oxygen, and nutrients, okay? So, that means, how do we get water? By giving it water, but if like, what kind of soil do we use that does water retention? Or CAC, cation exchange?
Porous materials.
Sorry?
Porous materials.
Not really porous materials, but almost like akadama. Akadama is a clay that does CEC, and that means cation exchange. So that means akadama takes water, takes nutrients, and gives these nutrients to the feeder roots, okay? We also have gravity water, and that means, what does gravity water mean? If we give water, it goes through our soil and it goes to the drainage holes. But also means that oxygen goes into the spot as well, because we give water, okay? But at the surface of our pot, there will stay water as well. Does the tree take that water?
If there are roots there, yes.
No. No. This will stay there until your akadama takes it up again. So feeder roots only take water from the soil that does cation exchange. Okay? So we need oxygen. How do we create oxygen in a pot? That's why we... Sorry?
Spaces.
Yes, open spaces or air holes into the pot. So if this would be a bonsai pot, and we have basketballs, all the same size of basketballs, that means also that we create the same air holes, or the same open spaces in these air holes, okay? And that's how we create oxygen into it, okay? But also, you need to check what your goal is in doing bonsai. So if I have a small cutting, and I want this cutting to become a very big tree and to create a bigger trunk, I use big grains of soil. Why? Because then I have bigger oxygen holes and my roots will grow faster and more thick because I need to give a lot of more water and more fertilizer, okay? Then why do we use pumice? Anyone? Why do we use pumice?
I like it because it's light and it seems like it retains humidity and moisture.
It doesn't retain it. It's good for drainage. So you can add pumice more for pine trees and trees that need less water. Also what it does is because it's porous, if feeder roots go at it, they split, or they tend to split better, okay? Also we can use lava, but because lava has a lot of iron in it and makes your foliage more darker. I don't use lava because lava retains water as well, okay? And I want to make my life more easy, so I only use akadama and pumice because I'm too lazy to save several kinds of soil. No, but I know that it works. Like in Japan, Shinji Suzuki only uses akadama and pumice as well, because these components work. And if you want to add iron, you can always add iron in your fertilizer or anything else. But for me, it doesn't work to use akadama, lava, and pumice because it's too much work and I don't have that much time. And also because Then I need to create a mix that, because I already have something that retains water, and that's the akadama. So why would I add lava with that as well? Okay? But you also need to check what's available. For instance, there's a guy in Japan who lives close, he has a bonsai nursery and he lives close to a volcano, so he just takes lava from his backyard, he sieves it and he uses it for his trees, because that works for him. I don't like to use lava completely because I bought some Yamadori olives and they put it in there, and because lava is very sharp, it looks like it cuts the roots, and the roots were not growing any further. Okay? Then you need to think of your goal in making bonsai, but also not only your goal, also balance need to be created as well, and proportion. So when my tree needs to grow, if I have a small cutting and I want to make it in a beautiful, bigger shoen, I will use bigger grains of soil, so my tree will grow a lot. Because bigger grains means that bigger air holes will be there. And if I would put it in a colander, I need to give a lot of water, a lot of nutrients, and it will grow much faster, because these air holes also mean bigger roots. But when this shoen tree is nearly finished and needs refinement, in what kind of soil should I put it then? What size of grain? Small one. Why? Yeah. It means that if you use smaller grains, that you also get smaller feeder roots, but also what happens, how do they say it? As above, so below. So if you have smaller feeder roots, also smaller foliage comes, okay? But what if I would have a big tree? Would I put it in big grains, small grains, or middle grains? Why wouldn't I put a big tree and small grains of akadama and pumice? Would small needles look odd on a big tree or not? It needs to be in proportion, so I would use big grains because our needles need to be bigger as well. It needs to be in proportion. And if you have a tree that's mid-size, you can put it in mid-size of grains because these needles needs to be in proportion as well, okay? And there are some in Europe who uses big size, then medium size, and then small size. For me, that doesn't seem logical because... In the same pot, yeah. But for me, it doesn't seem logical because with their chopstick, they try to go into the roots, and then all these grains are mixed, and that means that we have smaller air spaces in between as well. Because if you have this room and you have basketballs, then you add ping pong balls with it, you have less oxygen. Okay? Any more questions? No one?
Thank you very much, guys.
Okay.